Let's start at the beginning with the Neolithic Revolution. One day, some person realized that putting seeds into the ground would lead to food. This decreased the need to be a nomad and led to permanent settlements. One method used was slash and burn farming, where forests would be burned and the ashes would be used as fertilizer. Also around this time, animals were being domesticated. So, civilizations emerged. Let's talk about the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. There, the Sumerians had cuneiform writing and ziggurats for religious worship. The Babylonian king Hammurabi established a code which resembled an eye for an eye. It didn't punish equally, though. In Egypt, people lived near the Nile River for farming and trade. Yes, people settled near water for farming and trade. That's important to know. Egyptian kings were pharaohs and ruled with a theocracy on behalf of the gods. Early civilizations also emerged in China near the Yangtze and Huanghe rivers, and in India around the Ganges and Indus rivers. Advanced cities with impressive plumbing networks emerged at Harappa and Mohenjo-daro in the Indus River Valley. In China, dynasties of family rule led the country. Shi Huangdi expanded the Great Wall of China to keep out invaders from the north. You also should know that the Tang and the Song gave us porcelain, paper currency, and movable type print. Movable type was similar to Gutenberg's printing press that was used to spread the written word during the Renaissance. Chinese emperors rose and fell through a natural dynastic cycle. An emperor had to maintain the mandate of heaven to lead. Also in Asia, the Mongols established the world's largest empire under Genghis and Kublai Khan. The Japanese had samurai warriors who fought with bravery according to their Bushido code. Shoguns also rose to power in Japan. But what about religion and philosophy? Meet Rick. He will help us with Hinduism. Reincarnation meant to be born again and again. India is where Hinduism became prevalent. The caste system is a class-ranking order where one cannot leave a caste during a lifetime. Karma means the good and bad deeds that one does in a lifetime. You should also know that dharma is a duty to honor the caste. It's all related. If one has good karma, when they die, they will be reincarnated into a higher caste. Meet Ben. Buddha, or Siddhartha, was looking for enlightenment. He found it and realized that everything in life was suffering and one has to rise above the pleasures of the material world. If you follow the Four Noble Truths, the fourth truth being the moral staircase known as the Eightfold Path, one can reach nirvana and a release from all suffering. Also in Asia are the philosophies of Confucianism and Taoism. Confucius looked for harmony, good conduct, and honoring the relationships. Taoism looked to follow the way by accepting the forces of nature. In early Japan, Shintoism was popular. Some forms of Shintoism had animism, which believed that everything in nature has a spirit. In the Middle East, you need to know about Islam. No draft, or the 5 pillars. A Muslim must pray 5 times a day, observe the holy holiday of Ramadan, give charity, or alms, have faith in one God, Allah, and travel to Mecca in what is called the Hajj. The holy book of Islam is the Quran. The foundations of Western civilization come from Greece and Rome. Most important are their contributions. Unlike the military polis of Sparta, Athens embraced culture and democracy. Direct democracies let the common citizens govern. The Greeks gave us classical architecture, which is symmetrical with columns. Comedies and tragedies were also common in literature. The Golden Age of Greece also gave us the Olympics, which were played to honor the god Zeus. The big 3 philosophers were Spa. Socrates questioned everything around him and was killed for corrupting the youth of Athens. Plato wrote the Republic, and Aristotle applied logic to science and philosophy. One of his students was Alexander the Great. He amassed a huge empire, which was a blend of Hellenistic culture, from Egypt to India. Such a blending or exchange of culture is called cultural diffusion. The Silk Roads was another example of cultural diffusion. It linked Asia to parts of the Roman Empire. Yes, the Romans were important in that they preserved Greek culture. They also had architectural improvements like aqueducts, which transferred water. Eventually, the eastern part of the Roman Empire would become the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantines split from the Roman Catholic Church and established the religion of Eastern Orthodox in Constantinople. After Rome fell, the Middle Ages occurred. You need to know about the political and economic system of feudalism, which exchanged land for military service. Knights had a code of conduct known as chivalry. This was similar to the Bushido code of the Japanese samurai. The Crusades were fought between Christians and Muslims for control of the Holy Land. As fighting occurred, so did the exchange of ideas. Yes, cultural diffusion is an outcome of the Crusades. The Black Plague killed about 1/3 of the population of Europe, but these dark ages led to the Renaissance as culture began to thrive again and people celebrated human achievement. New art came from Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. The Prince was written by Machiavelli. It stated that rulers had to govern harsh to keep the people in check. In Africa, there was a gold salt trade on the west coast. There, a king named Mansa Musa converted to Islam. He went on the Hajj. Other empires embraced religious tolerance, such as Akbar the Great of the Mughals and Suleiman the Magnificent of the Ottoman Empire. In Native America, the Mayans, Aztecs, and Incas had impressive cultural and scientific advances. The Incas used terrace farming as a way to adapt agriculture to the Andes Mountains. Oh, by the way, maps that show mountains are called physical maps. That's important to know. The Native American empires were conquered by Europeans during the Age of Exploration. Conquistadors had advanced weapons. They established encomienda as a system of forced labor. The transfer of all crops and diseases between the Old and New Worlds was called the Columbian Exchange. That's cultural diffusion. Mercantilism was established to benefit the wealth of the mother country. Mother countries also began to trade slaves. As strong as the European explorers were, Zheng He was an explorer from the Chinese Ming. He had a larger fleet of ships in Asia a century earlier. Martin Luther protested against the church with his 95 Theses. This led to the Protestant Reformation. Religion was divided as new sects of Christianity emerged. As feudalism disappeared, absolute monarchs took over in Europe. They had complete and centralized power. Louis XIV said, "I am the state," and expanded Versailles in France. In Russia, there were czars like Peter the Great who wanted to modernize and imitate the West. In England, the monarchy was limited through the Magna Carta, Habeas Corpus Act, and English Bill of Rights. This is sometimes called a constitutional monarchy as well. The Age of Enlightenment criticized the king's power. Thinkers like John Locke and Rousseau used logic to demand natural rights. Montesquieu wanted separation of powers. Around the same time, a scientific revolution was taking place, where Nicholas Copernicus displayed a heliocentric model where the planets revolved around the sun. Revolution was soon to follow. In France, they revolted because of meat. The monarchy of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette was weak. Many read Enlightenment thought. The American Revolution was already successful, and the Third Estate was taxed unfairly. After the Bastille was stormed and the Declaration of the Rights of Man was penned, France became a republic. But not for long, as Napoleon would become the military dictator after suddenly seizing power in a coup d'etat. He gained much territory but squandered it after invading and losing his army in Russia. The Congress of Vienna tried to restore peace by bringing back monarchs dethroned by Napoleon. Revolution and independence movements spread to Latin America. There, Simon Bolivar was a liberator, and José San Martín helped rid South America of Spanish rule. Conflict continued in Europe because of nationalism. This means to have pride in one's nation because of a common culture, interest, or history. German Otto von Bismarck looked to unite Germany with blood and iron. That led to wars to establish the German state. The Industrial Revolution began in England and spread to the world. Much labor was done in factories. Urbanization occurred as people moved to cities. Capitalism also emerged, and Adam Smith advocated for laissez-faire, where the government would take its hands off the economy. Socialism became a popular theory as well under Karl Marx, who wrote the Communist Manifesto. He was upset between the gap between the rich and the poor. He favored a classless society. But his opponents argued for social Darwinism, or survival of the fittest. That played off of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, which stated that species gradually evolve. His ideas were controversial as they went against the teachings of the church. Countries turned to imperialism, or strong nations taking over and enforcing their beliefs on weaker nations. For Africa, the Berlin Conference divided up land among the Europeans. In China, this was done as well and called spheres of influence. The Chinese became addicted to a drug called opium, so they fought a war and lost. The Boxers protested foreign control in China and the spread of Christianity. They fought a war too, and lost. Japan also suffered from imperialism, but during the Meiji era, they modernized and imitated the West. They also became a world power. There was also protest in Britain's jewel in its crown, India. The Sepoy Mutiny was put down by the strong rule of the British Raj, as was the Amritsar massacre, which led to protesters being shot in 1919. Britain would control India until Gandhi practiced passive resistance and civil disobedience. His actions helped lead to independence in 1947. Of course, the country would become partitioned into India and Pakistan because of religious conflict. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. With all of the nationalism and imperialism going on, countries grew their militaries. They also started alliances. After the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, World War I began. Russia had to drop out because of Lenin's Bolshevik Revolution, which brought communism to Russia. Nonetheless, the Germans lost the war and were blamed for the conflict in the Treaty of Versailles. But since the League of Nations had no army, Adolf Hitler ignored the treaty and rose to power under fascism. He began to militarize. Europeans gave in to what he wanted in a policy called appeasement. But this didn't prevent World War II from happening. Teaming up with another fascist, Benito Mussolini, and Emperor Hirohito of Japan, Germany helped form the Axis powers. They lost to the Allies, and Germany was divided at the end of the war. The Holocaust occurred as a severe example of human rights violations. Hitler's policy of genocide led to the deaths of 6 million Jews. Other similar human rights violations occurred in the 20th century as Armenians were being killed in modern-day Turkey, ethnic cleansing was taking place in Bosnia, Tutsis were being killed by Hutus in Rwanda, natives were being relocated in Darfur, and Pol Pot's communist Khmer Rouge killed over 2 million Cambodians. World War II gave way to the superpowers of the US and USSR. This was the Cold War. Joseph Stalin proved scary. Earlier, he had a 5-year plan which looked to modernize the Soviet Union. He also purged or killed many of his opponents. In the Cold War, Stalin and the United States never directly had a war with bullets. Still, communism spread around the world. Mao Zedong established the People's Republic of China. His great leap forward was unsuccessful in modernizing China, though. It would be years before Deng Xiaoping's implementation of the 4 modernizations brought China industrial success. Of course, Xiaoping was also plagued by the Tiananmen Square massacre, which was a crackdown on Chinese students protesting for democracy. The U.S. practiced containment, which meant to stop the spread of communism. This led to conflicts in both Korea and Vietnam. By 1990, communism was falling all over Europe. Germany reunified when the Berlin Wall came down. After Mikhail Gorbachev's policies of glasnost and perestroika, a failed August coup signaled the collapse of the Soviet Union. Still, the world saw conflict. Apartheid divided South Africa's minority white population from the majority black population. World outrage led to the elimination of apartheid and freedom for Nelson Mandela. In the Middle East, Zionism led to a Jewish state in Israel, but wars were fought since the 1940s between Israelis and neighboring Arab states. The Camp David Accords brought some peace in 1978 between Israel and Egypt. Nations are still developing and westernizing. They need oil to industrialize and are dependent on OPEC for supply. In recent decades, a green revolution brought more food to the world. The European Union was created to increase Europe's strength. Today, nations are very dependent on each other and have a feeling of oneness. This is global interdependence. If you are watching this video somewhere outside of the United States, that's because the internet has linked countries together. That's yet another form of cultural diffusion. Best of luck on your test.